All right, so here's our third part of the environmental policy, environmental law, um, environmental planning lecture, chapter 24. So the last lecture we were talking about NEPA, the uh, how NEPA works and what it's supposed to do. But then also we got into and talked about the Clean Air Act, and we left off with the Clean Water Act. So the big points to just reemphasize with Clean Water Act, this is trying to protect us. This is trying to protect human health. Can we identify where pollution is coming from? Can we determine thresholds that are considered safe for human consumption? And can we make sure that those are maintained? So just give you guys a quick example. EPA says you can have 10 parts per million of nitrates in drinking water, and that's considered the threshold for safety. So you go to the drinking fountain, you turn on the tap in your house if you have a municipal water system. This doesn't apply to well water. I mean, the threshold is the same, but there's no regulations on wells. 10 parts per million. So when water is being produced through your water municipality system, they have to get the threshold, the nitrates below 10 parts per million. If it's above, it creates what's considered human health risks. So we're constantly monitoring. And again, the concern is, oh, well, that costs money to pull nitrates out of water. It does. You have to filter it. You have to process it. You have to remove it. Well, if we change the threshold and say, let's bump it up to 30, well, I don't need to filter the water anymore. Or I can spend less on filtration and purification of the water. But now what happens to us when we're drinking 30 parts per million of nitrates? So think about Flint, Michigan, and all these issues we are starting to hear more and more about in regards to lead in drinking water. Huge issue. Lead is a neurotoxin. It messes up brain development. So when kids are drinking water with lead in it, they're screwing up their neurological development, IQs get lowered, potential for success gets decreased. You're literally screwing up an entire generation if children are being forced to drink water with lead in it because they have no other option or because they're not aware of it. So that's what this Clean Water Act is supposed to be doing, is protecting human health and trying to ensure healthy, safe water for future generations. All right. So let's take a look at a thing called the Endangered Species Act. This is to protect wildlife. It started in 1973. The goal was to identify and list species that are vulnerable, threatened, or in danger of extinction. We have a lot of species out there that are sitting under this act and being protected by this act because of where we're at with mass extinctions. What this act does is it provides the rules for protecting species and their habitats so that species recovery can be possible. All right, so we look at a species, we look at a population. Are there enough of these grizzly bears? Are there enough of these types of birds, these types of fish, these types of insects, these types of plants? We need to protect them. And that's part of what CITES is involved in, protecting species on a global level with international trade. The Endangered Species Act is a US-based act for us. So we're going to go, okay, can we make sure these species are protected and also their habitat, so that way we can get them off of this endangered species list? They're no longer threatened with extinction. They're no longer considered a vulnerable species. And there's plenty of them out there. So you think about when a lot of these laws and acts were developed, it's the early 70s. It's when we really started to recognize a lot of the things we had been doing for decades and decades and decades were causing significant problems. So remember Rachel Carson, the book she wrote, Silent Springs, back in the 1960s, 1962, helped create awareness about pollution and human threats to human health through pollution. That really started a movement. We got all these other things happening to where society really recognized we need to be paying more attention to what we're doing to the environment and nature and everything out there. Okay, so again, you guys are going to delve into the Endangered Species Act and where is it at? What is the status of it today? Is it still protecting species? And I would stress again, is there science to support it? So when a species is listed as threatened, is there scientific data to support that? And then, oh, well, let's delist the species. Let's go from threatened and let's say the species is now fine. What was that decision based upon? Where is the science to support those decisions? Or is it all political based decisions? So again, challenges. That's part of environmental science. There's always these challenges we work with. So, all right. Last major one I want to mention is called the Superfund Act. This will be one of those a lot of people probably have not heard of. Superfund Act lists hazardous sites. Where are we storing wastes and pollutants and contaminants, things like that. What this does, let me get this typed out and then I'll walk you back through it. Okay, so what this does is it allows the EPA to establish liability. Let me underline that word here. Establishes liability so that a polluter has to pay for the cleanup of a contaminated site. So let's say I have a factory, I'm running a glass-making business, and there's going to be pollutants produced. There's chemicals used to make glass, there's this whole process, there's waste product. And I just keep dumping it in the field behind my factory. You know, I own that land too, and I just keep dumping it back there, and I just pile up the barrels of waste and trash, and I just leave it. Well, then my business fails, or I decide to just close it down, I'm retiring, or I quit, or whatever. Well, who's got to deal with all that pollution? Who's got to deal with all the toxins and the contaminants back there? That liability comes back to me as the owner. I should have dealt with this all along. I can't just dump pollutants and trash and things like that and leave it for somebody else or just ignore it because it poses a threat to human health. So the EPA can go in and look and go, okay, you need to clean it up, or we'll clean it up, but we're going to hand you the bill and make you liable for the cost of remediation or cleanup of this contaminated site. So in the book, it talks about these things called brownfield sites. Look into that. Some of that's happening in Springfield. The map that I have here, all those little red dots are current Superfund sites, sites that are listed containing hazardous waste. There's a bunch of proposed sites. Where can we store this stuff? And then there's a bunch of sites that have been cleaned up. Unfortunately, not as many green as red, but take a look at the little green dots. Those are sites that have been cleaned up. So the challenge is it costs a lot of money to do this. Sometimes those owners will just say, I'm out of here. I'm done. I'm abandoning the property. My business just I closed it. It went bankrupt, whatever. I don't have the money to pay for cleanup. Then it's left in the hands of the local government, the city, the state, the whoever. So we try to have federal funding to pay for some of this stuff, but sometimes that funding isn't as readily available as needed to clean all these sites up. Because you look, there's a lot of red dots there, not that many green. So, okay, so we got some basic laws under our belt. Be comfortable with what these laws do, what their intent is, and why the laws are there. So if you move into this direction of environmental studies, environmental policy, you're going to have to know, how do you create a policy? Well, it's this little circle here. First step is you identify a problem. You go, okay, is there a problem? Is there pollution? Is there, this species is almost extinct. I can't find any more of these fish in the lake or whatever. Set your agenda. What are you trying to do here? Okay. I'm trying to increase the population of eagles. I'm trying to decrease the amount of waste being discharged excuse me, into Lake Springfield, etc. Here's my proposal. This is what I think we need to do. Here's the science behind it. Make sure you have the science behind that proposal. Otherwise, it's not easy to convince people. Make sure you can talk to the general public in that proposal, because as you build support, you need the public behind you. You need a lot of people saying, yes, we agree with this, especially if it's going to cause disruptions to business or hiccups to people, things like that. Then can we enact a law or rule? If it's a local ordinance, go to city council. Will they do that? If it's a statewide policy, can I then move it to legislation to pass a bill, to pass a law, etc.? After that, we go into implementation. Okay, let's start to enforce this. Let's clean up the lake. Let's decrease pollution. Is it making a difference? We have to evaluate the results. Are the results supporting what we said we wanted to do over here in our proposal? Monitor it. Keep an eye on it. Do we need to make changes? Do we need to change anything about the policy? Do we need to change anything about how we do this process? Do we need to change anything about the restrictions? Maybe we can lighten up or lessen the restrictions because it's working great. Or do we need to make them tighter because it's just not working and the eagles aren't rebuilding their population? So you just keep going through this circular loop when you are working with environmental policy. I don't want this to sound bad, it's a never-ending process. And it shouldn't end. It's not like, okay, we're done with this act, we can eliminate it and walk away. No, we keep moving, keep watching, keep following it, and hopefully it achieves the long-term outcomes that you hope for. So you have to have a long-term goal in mind when you create a policy here. So to do a lot of this, we use an adaptive management strategy. Okay, let me change font size, get this typed out, and then we'll walk through what we're doing here with adaptive management. All right, so adaptive management is a solutions-based approach that is designed for management to be experimental for the actions being taken. What this means is checks and balances, constant monitoring, evaluation. It's similar to creating a policy. We start with our plan. This is what I want to do. This is what we're going to do. We then move forward with that plan. All right, let's change the land. Let's develop the subdivision, etc., etc. Let's try to preserve the species. We then monitor it. Is it doing what we need to do? Monitoring, you often need public's help and support, depending on the project and the plan. All right, let's evaluate. Is everything going the way it's supposed to go? Great. If it is, keep doing it. If it's not, make some adjustments, retool your plan, change a little bit of your actions, keep monitoring, evaluate it again. So adaptive management is a method. It's a solutions-based approach for management of environmental plans, environmental policies, environmental objectives. So we want to keep that in mind as just using that as a guideline for how we move forward with implementation of any kind of environmental policy or law.